Hi everyone, it's Hannah from the Starr County District Library. Welcome to Cricut Crafting. Today we are going to do one of my favorite projects. We are going to use heat transfer vinyl to decorate our canvas shoes. So before we get started, there are a couple of things you're going to need. Of course, as usual, we're going to need our Cricut. Today I'm going to use the Cricut Explore Air 2. We are going to need a mat, and I'm going to use the green standard grip mat, but if you don't have this on hand, you can also use the blue light grip mat. We're going to need our sneakers. For our machine today, we are going to be using the fine point blade. I also recommend having a pair of scissors and a weeding tool on hand. And then something I'm going to be using to help me out is heat resistant tape. This helps hold your design in place, but it's unnecessary. You can always just hold it with your hands, but this makes it a little bit safer. And then of course, we're going to need our heat transfer vinyl, so I'm going to be using yellow today. And then I'm going to be introducing you to a new item. We are actually going to be using the Cricut Easy Press Mini. And this is just a small iron that is going to help us adhere our heat transfer vinyl onto the canvas. So before we get started, you need to pick a design, and if you need to learn how to use the design space on your computer, then I recommend you check out my video on card making. I go a little bit more in depth on how you can make your own designs. But you can also download something for free off the internet. So for this sneaker right here, I printed out this design from jennifermaker.com, it was a free download. And then I also have this one that I'm going to be using today, so I have the yellow hearts, and this is also from jennifermaker.com. So we have that uploaded onto our computer, and the next thing we have to do is we have to load our vinyl. And this is going to be a little different than most materials, so let me show you how we get that onto the mat. Of course, we are going to take our plastic off, and we're going to put this aside for afterwards. The heat transfer vinyl is made out of two sides. So we have the shiny side, which makes up the vinyl portion, and then we have a transfer paper that is on the other side. Typically, when you are loading a material onto the mat, you're going to put it with the design side up. It's the opposite when you're working with heat transfer vinyl. What you want to do is you want to put it vinyl side down. So keep in mind, you're going to want to find this shiny side. The shiny side is going to go down onto your mat. Sometimes it's a little hard to tell. If you can't tell which side has the vinyl, then you can just pull it up on the corners and figure out which side is your vinyl and which side is your transfer tape. So this side right here is my shiny side, so that's where I have my vinyl. And I am just going to load this onto the mat by lining up the corners. And I'm going to be using this tool right here to make sure it sticks properly to my mat. I understand if you don't have this on hand, you can always use a credit card, or you can use the dull side of a butter knife. So what's important with this, especially when you're working with vinyl, is you want to make sure to get all of those bubbles out. So now that we have our material loaded onto the mat, we're just going to put this into the machine using the guides on the rolling track. And we're going to turn to our computer. Now, I told you that you're loading your material onto the mat a little different than you usually would. So there's some things you have to change when you're working on the makerspace. So what you need to do is you need to make sure to mirror your design, especially if you're working with text. In my case, it's going to look the same no matter what direction it's printed on, but if you don't mirror it, it's going to end up coming out backwards. So you're going to want to mirror it, and as usual, the design space is going to tell you exactly what tools you're going to need for this project. In this case, I'm just going to use a fine point blade. So that goes in right here. All right, now that we have our blade in, we're going to start the cutting process. With a design like this, it's going to take a little bit of time, so I'm going to do that off camera, and I'll join back with you when we're all done. So now we have our design cut on our heat transfer vinyl. The next thing we need to do is we need to separate the vinyl from the transfer paper. This can be a little tricky. What I always like to do is I like to start in the corner. So you just get that vinyl pulled up, and then you start to separate the two. And you want to make sure that you go slowly because you don't want to pull up any of your design. So I'm just going to pull it and then see how that happens. you're just leaving the vinyl of your design on the transfer paper. So I actually have one that is already done right here. And one thing you're going to want to keep in mind, I didn't have many problems with this design, but when I was working with the leopard print, there were a lot of little pieces of vinyl that I didn't want on here. That's where the weeding tool comes into play. So you can actually use this, and I can see a piece right here that I didn't get. So you can use your weeding tool and just get in there and remove those tiny pieces of vinyl that are tricky to get with just your hands. So we're going to move back to my yellow design, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare our shoe. So one thing you need to be careful with is even though the Cricut Easy Press Mini is small, it still gets really hot. So you want to prepare your shoe, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick a cloth up into my shoe. And you can use anything. You can use toilet paper, you can use tissue paper. You just want to be using something that'll give you a solid surface to work on and something that's going to protect your hands. I already have the Easy Press Mini warmed up. I put it on medium heat. There are actually 3 settings. So long as the first 2 are green, you know you're ready to go. And I'm going to use my scissors. I like to cut as close to the design as possible, so I'm going to do that real quick. I just think it makes it easier to work with. Now I'm working with a fairly large piece of vinyl. Some of you might just be using a small decal for your shoes, in which case I highly recommend you heat up the canvas before you lay your piece down. In my case, since I'm working with such a large piece of vinyl, I'm not going to worry about preheating it. I'm just going to take my time when I am using the Easy Press Mini to adhere it. So you want to lay your design down on the shoe, and as I said before, I am using the heat resistant tape to help me hold this down. And I typically like to do one side at a time. And what's really nice about that heat transfer tape is you can iron over it. So it's going to be really useful in holding down our design while we're using the iron. So we're going to tape it down to approximately where we want it. And then we're going to pull our scissors out again. And I'm just going to follow the natural line of the toe. You can see here how I did it. And I want to use my scissors to cut away that space. So I'm just going to follow the line of the shoe. And then you'll notice on this shoe, I used the excess to decorate the heel. Now that we have our design adhered to the shoe, we're going to start working with our Easy Press Mini. So one thing you need to keep in mind when you're trying to adhere the vinyl onto the shoe is you need to go slowly, and you need to work in small sections as well. I typically work in around a 2-inch section. When you're using an Easy Press, oftentimes what you do is you just hold it down on the design. That's not what you're going to want to do with the Easy Press Mini. So I typically choose a 2-inch section, and I take my iron and I go over that section for about 20 seconds. The really nice thing about the Easy Press Mini is it does have this really fine tip, so you can use it to get into those small crevices on your shoe. Okay. So I typically give it a couple of seconds to cool off, and then you can start pulling up that transfer paper, but you do want to be very careful that none of the vinyl is coming up. If it is coming up, no worries, you can fix that. You just want to put the tape back down, and you're going to go right back over that area with your Easy Press Mini. The key to doing this successfully is just taking your time. There's my first section. So off camera, I'm going to finish up the rest of the front, and then I'm going to finish my heel, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So here we have it. I was able to adhere the vinyl onto my shoe, and that's really all there is to it. It's not that complicated. It takes a little bit of practice with the Easy Press Mini, but once you get the hang of this, it gives you a lot of different options when it comes to crafting. Keep in mind that once we have our makerspace open at the main library, we do have Cricuts available for you to use. And then we also just added this to our inventory so you can come in and use the EasyPress Mini as well. Thank you for joining us for Cricut Crafting, and I hope you check in next time for another craft.